Have you ever wondered what happened to Israel's great enemies mentioned in the Bible? The Philistines, known for being a warrior and enigmatic people, left a profound mark on the history of Canaan and biblical accounts. They faced heroes like Samson, challenged entire armies, and even managed to capture the Ark of the Covenant. But what was their fate? Many people wonder, is there still any descendant of this ancient people? Who would the Philistines be today? In this video, we will explore these questions and uncover what happened to Israel's greatest rivals in the Bible. The Philistines were an important people in the history of the region later known as Palestine. They ruled over 5 major cities, forming an alliance known as the Pentapolis. This group stood out for its well-structured system of governance and a powerful military force capable of organizing attacks and defending against external enemies. Let's start by talking about the origin of the Philistines, a topic that remains a mystery and has sparked the interest of scholars for a long time. Famous for their war skills and culture, the Philistines left their mark on the history of the Middle East when they settled in the coastal region of Canaan. The Philistines are often linked to the Sea Peoples, a group of migrants who, at the end of the Bronze Age, left the Aegean region and arrived on the eastern Mediterranean coast, causing a great impact wherever they went. The name Philistines comes from the Hebrew Pelishtim and also appears in ancient Egyptian and Assyrian records. This name is associated with the territory of Philistia, which later gave rise to the term Palestine. Studies show that the word does not have a Semitic origin, indicating that the Philistines came from outside the region of Canaan and Israel. The Bible and archaeological research suggest that the Philistines came from a place called Kaftor, which many believe to be Crete. Terms like Cherethites, used to describe them, suggest this connection with the Cretans. Biblical texts, such as those of Jeremiah and Amos, along with archaeological findings, reinforce the idea that Crete and other areas of the Aegean were the starting points of this migration to Canaan. Around 1188 before Christ, during the reign of Ramses III, Egyptian records mention the Philistines as part of the Sea Peoples, a group of migrants searching for land and resources. These records show that the Philistines were seen as foreign invaders who arrived in ancient Canaan. They also participated in attacks that contributed to the downfall of major civilizations, such as the Hittites and some city-states in Syria. The greatest attempt by the Sea Peoples to invade Egypt occurred during this period, but Ramses III stood out by defeating them, preventing them from taking Egyptian territory. While other groups of the Sea Peoples were expelled, the Philistines were allowed to settle in Canaan, a region still under strong Egyptian influence. Although the Philistines came from elsewhere, their arrival in the region did not occur violently, but as a slow and gradual migration. They settled on the coast, dominated the local population, and eventually mixed with the Canaanites. Instead of eliminating the existing culture, they adopted parts of the traditions, such as the language and religious and cultural aspects of the inhabitants of Canaan. The Bible mentions the Philistines in the stories of Abraham and Isaac, who interacted with Abimelech, king of Gerar. Although some scholars believe these references may be from a different time, they show that there was some relationship between groups connected to the Philistines and the land of Canaan long before the great migration of the Sea Peoples at the end of the 2nd millennium before Christ. There are also theories that traders and settlers from the Aegean had already established trading posts in Canaan before this migration, facilitating the future presence of the Philistines in the region. The Philistines brought to Canaan a rich and varied culture, influenced by their origins in the Aegean, their travels, and contact with local cultures such as those of the Canaanites and Egyptians. They stood out for their efficient political organization, unique religious practices, advancements in the production of goods, and ease in learning new languages, which helped them coexist with other peoples. These characteristics make the Philistines one of the most intriguing groups in the history of the ancient Middle East. The Philistines' politics revolved around 5 main cities called the Pentapolis: Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Each city had a leader responsible for both civil and military matters. These leaders met in a council to make important decisions, especially regarding security and wars. This efficient organization gave the Philistines an advantage over their neighbors, such as the Israelites, who at the time had a more decentralized structure based on tribes. The leaders of the Philistine cities governed not only the main cities, but also the surrounding villages. They had the authority to gather the people, make decisions about wars, and offer sacrifices to the gods on behalf of the community. Although each city was independent, these leaders united during times of war or when facing external threats. This unity strengthened the defense of the Philistine region and expanded its influence. As for the Philistines' language, it remains a mystery, as no texts directly linked to them have been found. Many scholars believe that upon settling in Canaan, the Philistines quickly began speaking the local Semitic language, facilitating coexistence with the Canaanites. Even so, it is possible that traces of their original language were preserved. Later, after the exile, the mixed descendants of the Philistines spoke a dialect similar to Aramaic, as mentioned in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 24. The religion of the Philistines is not yet fully understood, but we know from biblical accounts and archaeological discoveries that they worshipped Canaanite gods such as Dagon, Ashtoreth, and Baal-zebub. According to the Bible, Dagon was one of their main gods, with temples in cities like Gaza and Ashdod. Ashtoreth was venerated in places like Ashkelon and Bethshan, while Baal-zebub was worshipped in Ekron. The Philistines also used religion to make important decisions, both in times of peace and in war. They practiced divination and carried images of their gods into battlefields, as described in 2 Samuel chapter 5 and chapter 21. Their rituals included sacrifices and ceremonies to honor their deities, ward off disasters, and seek guidance during difficult times. A clear example of this is found in 1 Samuel chapter 6, in the story of the return of the Ark of the Covenant, where the Philistine priests and diviners play an important role. The culture of the Philistines left behind objects that help us understand more about who they were. Their pottery is very distinctive, featuring spiral decorations, stylized bird designs, and geometric patterns, usually in red and black. In Egyptian depictions at Medinet Habu, the Philistines are shown wearing feathered helmets, typical Aegean-style clothing such as short kilts, and carrying spears, long swords, and round shields, reflecting their origins. The Philistines also mastered iron-working technology and, for a time, prohibited the Israelites from having blacksmiths, securing an advantage in weapon production. In the Bible, the Philistines are described as Israel's principal enemies, especially during the time of the Judges and the early monarchy. From small skirmishes to large battles, the relationship between these two peoples was fundamental to the history of ancient Palestine. As previously mentioned, the first time the Bible mentions the Philistines is during the time of Abraham and Isaac, who interacted with Philistine leaders in Gerar. This indicates that groups from the Aegean had already settled in Canaan, although they had not yet gained the political and military power they would later possess. During the period of the Judges, the relationship between Israel and the Philistines became much more tense. The judge Shamgar was one of those who managed to deliver the Israelites, notably defeating the Philistines. However, they continued to be a significant threat to Israel. It is in this context that Samson emerges, an Israelite hero known for his incredible strength and his confrontations with the Philistines. His story, including his relationship with Delilah, and his final act of destroying Dagon's temple in Gaza symbolizes the ongoing struggle between these two peoples. At the beginning of the 10th century before Christ, the Philistines achieved a significant feat by capturing the Ark of the Covenant in a battle, also destroying the sanctuary at Shiloh. For the Israelites, this was a very painful defeat and marked the peak of Philistine dominance in the region. With the increasing threat from the Philistines and other peoples, Israel realized the need for strong and unified leadership. Thus Saul was chosen as the first king, initiating the monarchy to unite the tribes against their enemies. Saul fought several battles against the Philistines. At Michmash, he achieved an important victory, but it was short-lived. Later, at Ephes Dammim, the Philistines once again challenged Israel. It was at this moment that David, still a young man, faced and defeated Goliath, the Philistine giant. This victory was not just a military success, but also a demonstration that the God of Israel was more powerful than the gods of the Philistines. The rivalry between Saul and David led David, despite being one of Israel's greatest warriors, to seek refuge among the Philistines. He became a vassal of Achish, king of Gath, showing how complex the relations between the two peoples were. During this time, David lived in a curious situation. He was a temporary ally of the Philistines, but also the future king who would confront them. After the death of Saul and his sons in the Battle of Mount Gilboa, where they were defeated by the Philistines, David took the throne and unified Israel. As king, he led military campaigns that definitively weakened the Philistines. David expanded Israel's territory, subdued the Philistines, and ended their military power, consolidating Israelite dominance in the region. Even after their defeat, the Philistines remained an autonomous people and sometimes engaged in regional conflicts, especially during the period of the divided monarchy. The Philistine cities made alliances with greater powers or took advantage of moments of weakness in Israel and Judah. For example, King Jehoshaphat of Judah received tribute from the Philistines, while his son Jehoram faced invasions that weakened the southern kingdom. In the Bible, the Philistines also have a symbolic significance. Several Hebrew prophets mentioned the destruction of Philistine cities as part of God's judgment against the nations that mistreated Israel. Prophets like Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Zephaniah, and Zechariah spoke about the tragic fate of the Philistines. Jeremiah, for instance, highlighted that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, conquered Philistine cities, which was seen as the fulfillment of these prophecies. Over time, the Philistines, who were once a great power and rivals of Israel, began to lose political and military strength. This decline was caused by several factors, such as invasions by great empires, changes in alliances between peoples, and events that shifted the balance of power in the ancient Middle East. The identity of the Philistines, primarily organized around the 5 cities of the Pentapolis, began to weaken in the 7th century before Christ with the conquests of the Assyrians. Leaders like Tiglath-Pileser, Sargon, and Sennacherib subdued the peoples of the region, including the Philistines, who were forced to pay heavy tributes. Despite attempts to resist through alliances with Egypt and other kingdoms, successive defeats and the Assyrians' reprisals weakened their cities and drained their resources, marking the beginning of the end of their influence. The Philistines' attempts to rebel against Assyria resulted in severe retaliation. Sargon, for example, crushed a rebellion in Ashdod and turned the city into a province directly controlled by the Assyrians. His successor, Sennacherib, continued this policy of domination, keeping the Philistine cities under strict control and imposing heavy tributes. This not only weakened Philistia's political independence, but also affected the social and economic organization of the Philistines, who were gradually assimilated into Assyrian culture and administration. When the Assyrian Empire fell, Babylon took control of the region. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, led campaigns against the Philistine cities as part of his strategy to strengthen his rule. During these attacks, especially in Ashkelon and Gaza, many Philistines were captured and deported to other parts of the empire. These deportations dispersed the Philistine population, further weakening their identity as a unified people and marking the end of their relevance as a distinct group. Later, after the conquest of Babylon by the Persians, the remaining Philistines became part of the Persian Empire. This empire adopted a decentralized administration, allowing some autonomy to local peoples. However, the Philistines, already culturally weakened, were gradually assimilated by other groups in the region, such as the Canaanites and the Jews. Their former territories became inhabited by mixed populations, and the Philistine cultural and religious traditions were eventually lost over time. With the conquests of Alexander the Great and the arrival of Hellenistic culture, this process of assimilation intensified. Cities in ancient Philistia, such as Gaza and Ashdod, transformed into multicultural centers where people of different origins lived. The Philistine identity was gradually absorbed into a broader urban culture influenced primarily by Greek civilization and other local traditions. Many people wonder, who are the Philistines today? To answer this, it is important to understand that by around the 5th century before Christ, the Philistines ceased to exist as a people with their own identity. They were absorbed by other Semitic cultures and influenced by the Babylonians, Persians, and Hellenists. The prophet Zechariah, one of the last to mention them in the Bible, predicted that a mixed people will dwell in Ashdod, indicating that the Philistine cities were already culturally blended at that time. Both the Bible and historical records show that with the destruction of their cities and the dispersion of their population, the Philistines disappeared as a nation or distinct ethnic group. The disappearance of the Philistines as a distinct people was completed during Roman rule, when the term Palestine began to be used to designate the region more broadly, with no direct connection to the ancient Philistines. Although they no longer exist as a cultural or political group, the Philistines left an important legacy. Their stories remain alive in biblical narratives, place names, and the memory of the region they once occupied. The name Palestine comes from Philistia, the land of the Philistines, and was adopted by the Greeks and Romans. After the Jewish revolts during the Roman period, the region was renamed the province of Palestina, possibly as a way to dissociate the Jews from the land of Judah, connecting it to the ancient Philistines, Israel's historical enemies. Even though the Philistines no longer existed, the use of the name carried political and symbolic significance in that context. Therefore, the idea that descendants of the Philistines might exist today is intriguing, but difficult to confirm. So far, there is no genetic or historical evidence indicating a direct connection to the Philistines. Over time, under the rule of the Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, the cultural and ethnic characteristics of the Philistines gradually blended with local populations until they disappeared entirely as a distinct group. By the Roman era, the inhabitants of the region were no longer Philistines, but a diverse population with Semitic, Greek, and other cultural influences. Although the name Palestine retains a link to the memory of the Philistines, it is highly unlikely that there are any direct descendants of this people today. Their complete assimilation into dominant cultures and the absence of any group identifying as Philistine reinforce this idea. Recent DNA studies in an ancient Philistine city show that its inhabitants had mixed genetic origins. Initially, there was a strong European influence, likely from southern European populations who migrated across the Mediterranean and settled in the southwestern region of Canaan, near present-day Gaza Strip. Over time, however, the Philistines intermingled with local peoples, such as the Canaanites, and were assimilated by the empires that controlled the region, causing their original ancestry to disappear. For this reason, the Palestinians living in the Gaza region today cannot be seen as direct descendants of the ancient Philistines. They are the result of a long history of blending among various peoples, including Canaanites, Israelites, Assyrians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. Furthermore, modern Palestinian identity has been shaped primarily by more recent historical events, such as Arab rule and current political conflicts. Thus, directly linking modern Palestinians to the ancient Philistines would be an oversimplification and inaccurate. Now, write in the comments if you already knew the history of the Philistines or learned something new from this video. Don't forget to leave your like, share it with more people, and subscribe to the channel to follow more content like this. Turn on the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. May God bless you and see you in the next video.